We always think life is predictable. A steady job, a family, love. But sometimes, even the most stable things can crumble in an instant. For Ethan Thomas, a systems analyst, life was a series of numbers and precision. Everything was under control, until strange charges started appearing on his account. And then, he discovered something far worse, a brutal betrayal waiting for him. But as the story begins to unfold, Ethan realizes that this betrayal is no longer a personal matter. Behind it all is something much bigger, a hidden network Ethan never imagined. In a race against time, where trust is shattered, can Ethan uncover the truth before it's too late? And can he ever reclaim peace in his life? Welcome to the story of Ethan Thomas, where every decision could change everything. This is a story of betrayal, survival, and dark secrets. Join me as we uncover it all, and don't forget to hit subscribe to follow this thrilling journey. Seattle had always been a city of contrasts. The morning fog hugged the skyline, and the streets buzzed with the soft hum of early commuters. Nestled in one of the city's more upscale neighborhoods, Ethan Thomas lived a life many would envy, calm, composed, and predictably comfortable. As a systems analyst for a prominent tech company, Ethan's life was wrapped in routines and structure, both at work and at home. His wife, Claire, was a project manager at a marketing firm. Their relationship, once vibrant with passion, had settled into a quieter, more predictable rhythm. The small cracks in their bond were beginning to show, but Ethan was too absorbed in his work to notice. He was content, or so he thought. It all started on a regular Tuesday morning. While reviewing his bank statements over breakfast, Ethan noticed something strange. Small, unusual charges that didn't seem to fit his typical spending habits, high-end clothes, extravagant dinners, and luxury items. At first, he thought it was a mistake. But after further scrutiny, the charges began to pile up, each one a reminder of something amiss. Must be some mistake, Ethan muttered under his breath, but the uneasy feeling lingered. As days passed, Ethan's suspicions grew. Claire's behavior had become erratic, she was often distracted, preoccupied, and overly focused on her boss, Robert, a suave and charismatic figure at her firm. The tension between them, once just a faint undercurrent, was now palpable. Ethan started to notice subtle changes in her attitude, the way she would speak about Robert with a strange emphasis on his qualities that Ethan had never heard her praise before. During a particularly awkward dinner, Claire mentioned how Robert had just offered her a promotion. "He's been really supportive," Claire said, her eyes lingering on her phone for a moment too long. Ethan tried to brush off the feeling that something wasn't right. But every glance, every word, every action seemed to fuel his growing paranoia. It wasn't until Ethan overheard a late-night conversation between Claire and her best friend, Lily, that the truth began to reveal itself. Claire's voice, muffled through the walls, was filled with excitement, and a chilling sense of betrayal. "I've already planned it all out," Claire whispered. "Once I've gotten everything I need, Robert and I are going to leave. We'll be gone before he even notices. The money's already in place." Ethan's heart sank as he listened in disbelief. The woman he had trusted, the one he had shared his life with, was plotting to leave him. Not only that, but she was conspiring to take everything he had worked for. Devastated, but determined not to let his life fall apart without a fight, Ethan started to gather evidence. His skills as a systems analyst came in handy. He began digging into the financial records, tracing the suspicious transactions back to Claire's accounts. He installed cameras in the house and set up tracking software on their shared devices. Every detail, every conversation, became another clue in his growing investigation. Days turned into weeks, and the evidence mounted. Ethan's worst fears were confirmed. Claire was planning to empty their joint accounts and flee the city with Robert, leaving Ethan with nothing. The day of reckoning came on a rainy Saturday morning. Ethan, with a calm but steely determination, confronted Claire in their home. As she walked into the living room, the familiar scent of her perfume hit him, an odd reminder of the past, when everything had seemed perfect. I know everything, Claire, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. I've seen the bank statements, the emails, the calls. You and Robert. I know what you've been planning. Claire's face went pale. The shock quickly turned to anger, but then to something else, regret. Guilt. Or perhaps fear. You don't understand, Ethan, Claire began, her voice trembling. This was never about you. It's about me, my future. Robert and I, we were going to build something real. Ethan shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You've already built your future, on my back. Claire tried to deny it, but Ethan's evidence was irrefutable. The lies, the deceit, the betrayals, they were all laid bare before her. The confrontation was a moment of clarity, but also of destruction. The life they had built together was shattered. The news of Claire's betrayal spread quickly. Ethan didn't just keep it to himself, he went public. He shared the evidence with friends, co-workers, and even the authorities. Claire and Robert's plan unraveled in the most public way possible. The FBI soon got involved. Claire was investigated for financial fraud, conspiracy, and breach of trust. Robert, too, was dragged into the legal mess, his company facing significant scrutiny. Despite the legal consequences, Claire's arrogance remained. She still denied any wrongdoing, trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. But Ethan had already taken back control. Ethan's lawyer was relentless. They filed lawsuits, froze assets, and initiated a long and grueling process to recover what Claire had stolen. The court battles stretched on, but Ethan was unyielding. He wasn't just fighting for money, he was fighting for justice. Claire and Robert's lives were ruined. Claire lost her job, her reputation, and her freedom. Robert faced criminal charges, and his once thriving business crumbled under the weight of scandal. Ethan, on the other hand, found a sense of catharsis in his actions. Though the process was painful, he felt as though he was reclaiming his life, piece by piece. Months later, Ethan stood outside his apartment, looking out at the city. It was the same Seattle skyline, but it felt different. He had lost something irreplaceable, the trust of the woman he loved, but he had gained a new sense of self. He no longer allowed the world to dictate his choices. But the road ahead was uncertain. Claire and Robert had both been sentenced to prison, but the financial damage was done. Ethan was left with the remnants of a life he had built from the ground up. The question lingered, what came next? Ethan had hoped that the worst was behind him. The trials were long, the revelations were painful, but he had survived. He was beginning to rebuild his life, piece by piece. His apartment had become his sanctuary, a place where he could find solace after months of chaos. Yet, as time went on, the feeling of unease never quite left him. Late one evening, as Ethan was reviewing a few work emails, he received a strange notification. It was from an unknown email address with a simple subject line, "It's not over." Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it. The email was brief but chilling, "You think you've won, Ethan. But there's always someone watching." There was no signature, no further context, just a string of seemingly random numbers and letters at the bottom. Ethan's stomach dropped. He closed the laptop and sat back in his chair, staring at the wall. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but deep down, he knew better. Claire and Robert were both behind bars. Who else would want to torment him? The unsettling thought began to form, was this a ghost from his past, or was it someone new? Someone who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next morning, Ethan visited the police station. He showed the officer the strange email. They were polite but dismissive. "It's probably just some sick joke. People have been known to send these kinds of messages when they're bored or frustrated," the officer said. But Ethan wasn't convinced. He'd been on edge since the day he discovered Claire's betrayal. His instincts had been right before, and he couldn't ignore the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there. He left the station with more questions than answers. That night, as Ethan was heading back home from a meeting, something unusual caught his eye. A black car parked across the street from his apartment, its windows tinted so dark that no one could see inside. It wasn't the first time he had noticed it. The car had been there for the past few days, always around the same time, never moving. He didn't like the feeling it gave him. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it someone from Claire's past, or was it a person with a vendetta? He couldn't shake the thought that someone had been watching him, waiting for an opportunity. The following morning, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He decided to take action. He had already installed surveillance cameras around his building, but it was clear that whoever was watching him knew how to stay hidden. Ethan needed to be smarter, more resourceful. He contacted a former colleague, Marcus, a hacker with whom he had worked on a few projects in the past. Marcus had the skills that Ethan needed to dig deeper into the mystery. They met in a small cafe, away from prying eyes. "I've been getting these messages," Ethan explained, showing Marcus the strange email. "And I think someone's been following me." Marcus didn't waste any time. He took the laptop from Ethan, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he began tracing the email's origins. Within minutes, he found something. "It's coming from an encrypted server, one that's almost impossible to track," Marcus said, his face pale. "But there's one thing that stands out. The server has been linked to a few other unsolved cases, people who've mysteriously disappeared or had their lives ruined in some way." Ethan felt his heart race. Was he truly in danger again? "I don't know who's behind this," Marcus continued, "but whoever they are, they're far more dangerous than anyone you've dealt with before." Ethan knew he had to act fast. If there was someone out there who wanted to destroy his life once more, he couldn't afford to wait. Armed with Marcus's information, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator, Lena Harris, a woman with a reputation for being able to find anything, or anyone. Lena immediately got to work, conducting a series of background checks and monitoring Ethan's apartment complex for unusual activity. Meanwhile, Ethan's own investigation deepened. He followed up on the leads Marcus had found, contacting the authorities about the cases linked to the encrypted server. But there was no official response. The police seemed to be brushing him off once more, even though the stakes were higher than ever. One evening, as Ethan was returning home from a long day of work, he noticed something different. The black car was gone, but in its place was a familiar figure, Claire. She was standing outside his apartment, her face hidden beneath a hood. She didn't seem to notice him at first, but when she did, her expression was a mixture of guilt and fear. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, his voice cold. "I need to talk to you," Claire said, her voice shaking. I didn't come back because of Robert or anything. There's something else going on. I didn't tell you everything, Ethan. I couldn't. But now, you need to know the truth." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had no interest in hearing more lies from Claire, but something about the urgency in her voice stopped him. "Talk," he said flatly. Claire took a deep breath, her eyes darting around as if she were looking for someone. "The people who are behind all of this, they're not just after you, they're after both of us. And you can't fight them alone. I was part of something much bigger than I ever realized. It wasn't just Robert. There are others. People with connections. Dangerous people. And they're closing in." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "Why are you telling me this now?" "I didn't want to believe it," Claire whispered. "But it's real. They've been tracking us. I tried to get out, but now I can't. You're the only one who can help me. You're the only one who can stop them." Ethan didn't know what to believe. Claire's sudden appearance, after everything she had done, left him conflicted. But there was no time to waste. If what she said was true, then a much larger force was in play, one that had its sights set on destroying both their lives. "I can't trust you," Ethan said, taking a step back. "But I don't have a choice." The sound of a car engine revving in the distance caught his attention. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he pulled Claire into the shadows. Just as they hid, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of his building. Two figures stepped out, their movements swift and deliberate. "They're here," Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan's heart raced. This was no longer about a personal betrayal, it was about survival. And for the first time, Ethan felt the weight of the true battle ahead. Ethan and Claire stayed hidden in the shadows, holding their breath as the figures from the SUV moved toward the building entrance. The heavy sound of their footsteps reverberated in the quiet night air, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "This is it," Ethan muttered under his breath. He was no longer sure who to trust, but one thing was clear, the people after him and Claire were not ordinary criminals. They were organized, methodical, and ruthless. Claire's voice was barely audible as she whispered, "We need to leave. Now. They're not just here for you, they want both of us." Ethan didn't hesitate. Without a word, he grabbed Claire's hand, and the two of them slipped through the back exit of the building into the alley. Their breath was shallow, and their hearts pounded in their chests as they made their way to the nearest street, hoping to disappear into the night. But the sound of a car door slamming followed them. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and saw two men emerging from the alley, their faces masked and their movements swift. They were getting closer. "Keep running," Ethan barked at Claire. "I'll hold them off." Before Claire could protest, he turned and ran toward the nearest parked car, an old sedan that had seen better days. The keys were in the ignition, and with no time to waste, Ethan jumped in and started the engine. As he backed out of the alley, Claire barely caught up, sliding into the passenger seat. Ethan gunned the engine, sending the car speeding down the streets, the sound of the SUV's engine roaring in pursuit. He could feel the heat of the chase on his neck, but he knew he couldn't outrun them forever. They had to find a way to stop this. The night seemed endless. As Ethan drove through the dark streets, Claire kept her eyes on the rearview mirror, trying to track the black SUV. It was close, too close. "I never thought they'd come after us like this," Claire said, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't respond. His mind was racing, piecing together what little he knew. Marcus's cryptic message about the encrypted server. Lena's report about the strange figures lurking around the building. And Claire's sudden reappearance, telling him about the larger, shadowy group that was hunting them. It all pointed to something far more sinister than he had imagined. "I wasn't just an accomplice," Claire said, her words shaking. "I was recruited into this group long before I ever met you, Ethan. They were the ones who pushed me toward Robert. They knew what they were doing. But they were playing a much larger game." Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. "What are you talking about?" "There's an organization," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about money or power. It's about control over everything. They have their fingers in everything, technology, politics, finance. Robert was just a pawn. And so was I. But now, they want to silence me. You've seen the email. I wasn't the only one they were watching. There are others." Ethan's mind was racing. "Who else is involved?" "I don't know," Claire said, her eyes wide with fear. "But I think you're closer to the truth than you realize. They've been watching us for months. They knew about the trial, about everything. They never stopped following us." Suddenly, the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood up. The feeling of being watched, the strange occurrences, everything clicked. This wasn't just about his betrayal. This was much bigger. Ethan's car veered onto a deserted highway, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The black SUV was still behind them, but they were nearing a secluded area, a place Ethan had scouted earlier when he was searching for answers. It was a remote warehouse, far from the city's prying eyes. It could be their last chance. "We're almost there," Ethan said, his voice determined. Claire's eyes darted nervously from the rearview mirror to the road ahead. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" "We don't have a choice," Ethan said, his grip tightening on the wheel. "We need to confront them now, before they finish what they started." The SUV closed in on them, the headlights blinding. Ethan didn't slow down. Instead, he pushed the car harder, his foot on the gas, racing toward the warehouse. As they approached the compound, Ethan skidded the car to a halt. The black SUV slammed into the dirt behind them, its doors swinging open as masked figures poured out, their guns raised. Ethan jumped out of the car, grabbing Claire by the arm. They sprinted toward the warehouse, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. But just as they reached the door, the figures were upon them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the sound of weapons cocking rang out. "Don't move," a voice commanded. The figure standing before them removed his mask, revealing a familiar face. It was Marcus. Ethan froze. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus, the one person he thought he could trust, was part of the enemy. "Marcus, you..." Ethan's voice was hoarse with disbelief. Marcus smirked, stepping closer. "You were always too naive, Ethan. This game, it's bigger than you think. It's not about money. It's about control. You were just another piece in the puzzle." Claire backed away, horrified. You've been working with them all along." "Not exactly," Marcus said, his tone cold. "I'm one of them. But I've been watching you, Ethan. Watching how you've been unraveling our plan. It's impressive, actually. Too bad it won't matter in the end." Ethan's fists clenched. "Why? Why did you do all of this?" Marcus shrugged. "You were a good pawn, but in the end, I have bigger things to worry about." "We both do. You've been living a lie, Ethan. Everything you think you know, it's nothing but a distraction." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the air. The FBI had arrived, Lena had tipped them off. Marcus cursed. This isn't over. But Ethan wasn't about to let it end this way. As Marcus turned to run, Ethan lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The FBI agents closed in, their guns drawn. "Get him out of here," one of the agents said, as two others restrained Marcus. Ethan stood, panting, his chest heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. He turned to Claire, whose face was pale. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," Ethan said, his voice strained. "I never wanted any of this," Claire whispered, tears in her eyes. "But I can't undo what I've done. Please, just..." The words hung in the air, but there was no time for answers. Marcus was taken into custody, and the truth about the organization began to unfold. The conspiracy was far larger than Ethan had ever imagined. The connections they had to world governments, financial institutions, and powerful elites were staggering. But even as Marcus was questioned, a dark thought lingered in Ethan's mind. This wasn't over. Marcus had been only a small part of a much larger network, one that still had power and influence. Ethan knew that this fight, this war for control, was far from finished. As the days passed, Ethan and Claire went their separate ways, each dealing with the aftermath in their own way. But for Ethan, there was a sense of finality, a sense that, despite the chaos and betrayal, he had come out stronger. Yet as he looked out over the city from his apartment window one last time, a new email notification appeared on his phone. It was from an unknown sender. "You think the game is over. But it's just begun. Thank you for watching the story of Ethan Thomas. Will he overcome the darkness of his past? And will the truth be revealed? The questions remain, and you are the one who can help us uncover the answers. If you enjoyed this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any part of this thrilling journey. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave a comment below this video. We'd love to hear from you and discuss with you. Thank you for joining us. Remember, this story is just beginning. See you in the next episode.